how do we create this idea of a session on top of HTTP? What are the nuts and bolts for a client beginning a dialogue with the server and being able to continue that dialogue across multiple HTTP requests? Because as we remember, the client's going to send a request to the server. So let's go ahead and draw this out. We're going to have our mobile device that's our client. And the client's going to send a request to the server, and it's going to get a response, and then it may disconnect. And then it may send another request, get a response, and disconnect. So when we send this second request, let's say this is the first and this is the second, how does the server know that this is the same client that sent the first request? Well, we could try to do this with things like the IP address of the client. We could try to say, well, if they're sending it from the same IP address or the same MAC address on the network, and if you don't know what these things are, don't worry too much about it. But the problem is all of those types of identifiers can be spoofed. There's all kinds of tools that an attacker could use to send false data to the server about the IP address or MAC address or other things, and ways that the attacker could try to conceal that data from the server. So how do we know that this second request is coming from the same client? Well, the way that we do this with most typical web applications is by sending a session cookie back to the client with the first request. So what we'll typically do is have a first request that's something like /login, and this will be over HTTPS because we don't want anyone to intercept this. And we'll provide, the user and the password in the HTTP request, maybe as the body or something else. And this will all be encrypted and sent via HTTPS. So the server is going to see this. It's going to validate who that user is. It's going to check their password against the password in the database, and then it's going to decide whether or not they want to establish a session that's associated with this user. So the server may say, yes, I believe that this is Bob, or I believe this is Alice, and I've verified their passwords. And so then the server is going to send back a cookie. And remember, a cookie is just a little bit of data that the server is sending back to the client and asking it to remember. So the server is going to send back a session cookie, which is a little bit of data that the server is going to use to help re-identify that client in its session the next time it connects. And so what will happen is the second request, because the server sent a cookie, the cookie will be sent by the client back to the server on the second request. So a cookie is a piece of information that the server wants the client to remember and wants the client to send with each subsequent request back to the server. So on the server, it can see it's going to send this session cookie, and it's going to associate this session cookie with Bob. So we'll call this cookie 1. And it will say Bob's cookie is 1. And then the session cookie 1, when it shows back up, it will go and it'll say, whose cookie is cookie 1? And it will say, well, that's Bob's cookie here. And so it knows that this second request must be coming from the same person or the same client that sent the first request. Because that first request had a cookie sent back, a session cookie, or a little bit of identifying data. The client is providing that bit of identifying data again, so now the server can say, I know who that is. That's that same client that sent me that original login request for Bob. And so I'm going to treat this request as if it's Bob. I'm going to give them all of the rights and privileges that Bob has, because previously they provided me with Bob's username and password. And I sent them this cookie back. They provided me that cookie again. So unless somebody compromised them, I can trust that this is Bob sending the same request. Now this is why it's so important that this always be done over HTTPS, at least for cases where there's anything consequential in this data. or anything consequential that Bob can do on the server, or anything consequential that Bob doesn't want exposed that's his data that lives on the server. So when we are sending this login, obviously the username and password needs to be protected. So that needs to go over HTTPS and encrypted. The other reason is we want the response to be encrypted, because this session cookie then gives whoever holds it the ability to tell the server and pretend to the server to be a particular client, in this case to be Bob. So if somebody could intercept this session cookie, they could then go and provide it to the server and impersonate Bob and get access to his bank accounts or whatever else it is. So this is why HTTPS is so important when establishing and maintaining sessions, is because we want to be able to prove our identity, get back a cookie, and then we want to be able to provide that same data or proof of identity to the server and do it securely. So this connection also has to be over HTTPS. Anytime we're sending this session cookie, we want that data over HTTPS and encrypted, because we don't want someone to be able to intercept this. If somebody can intercept the session cookie, they can impersonate the client that's logged in with it.